Hey there, I'm Joey from EDH Rec. A little while ago, I released a video about 100 creators' signature decks, 100 folks and 100 commanders that they're well known for, or an archetype that they play a lot, or a particular deck that they made famous. It was a super fun video to do, but during research for that video, I kept encountering something kind of funny. I'd ask folks what they think is their one big signature deck, but I'd usually get back two responses. One, the deck that they're known for, but then separately, two, another deck that is their actual favorite. That's an interesting divide. Sometimes things get associated with you, but they're not the actual thing that best suits your personal preferences or the thing that you actually enjoy the most. Sometimes you wind up with a reputation for certain game styles that don't always match how you personally feel. So in this video, I'd like to unpack that a little, to observe the factors that go into signatures versus favorites, and what causes that distance. Before I get too deep into it, let me do the YouTube thing where I remind you to do the YouTube thing, because the numbers don't lie. When we talk about the YouTube thing, more people do the YouTube things, and it helps out a lot when people do the YouTube things. So silly. In addition to that, alongside the release of this video, I'll also have an EDH Rec article up today that is basically my whole script for that original 100 creators video. Sifting through the original video can be a little bit of a hard way to search through some stuff for some folks, so I wanted to provide it in a different form for people who wanted to search up some of their favorite creators or find some new creators that's in a text format if that happens to be easier for them. So a link to that is, of course, in the description below. And frankly, while you're checking that out, you should give the other articles on EDH Rec a look too. There are some very skilled writers with some very clever brews over there. With all that business done, let's get to it. So, the gulf between a person's signature deck versus their favorite deck. Let's first start off by saying that for tons of people, there's no distinction there. Corporate wants you to find the difference between these two pictures, and they're the same picture. Using myself as an example, I am known for Babala Saga. It's undoubtedly my most viewed deck on my Architect profile, and it's my favorite deck. The reason it became my signature deck is because I never shut up about how much I love it, so the reputation matches my personal feelings. But there are some folks for whom there is more of a difference. For instance, when I was chatting with Olivia about this signature deck video, she volunteered herself as an example. She's very well known for Breya. That's easily her most popular deck, and she's blinged it out a bunch. It is her pride and joy. But when we were chatting afterwards, it kind of came up that maybe the deck she's reaching for more and more lately, the deck that she just never gets tired of playing, is her Omen Kill deck, aka the USS Dogwater, which is all about mono blue vehicle nonsense. As another example, MTG Mudsta. Before I even messaged Mudsta to ask him what he thinks his signature deck would be, I had Trostani in my mind as the thing that I know him most for. And he confirmed that. He thinks that's his signature deck too, but he also mentioned that Duretti is actually his favorite one to play. Or Alan, Mental Misplay. A lot of folks asked, wait, isn't his signature deck Marin? He's played Marin for years. But he told me when we were talking that he's really all about the Italis right now. And he clarified that to all the commenters on that video too, that while Marin was his go-to for many, many years, he just hasn't really played it in forever. I'm interested in those differences. That's what I want to dig into. And to do that, I think we got to establish a couple of basic things first. So to start, what is a signature deck? Well, if a thing is going to be your signature XYZ, that means it is a thing for which you are particularly known. So by necessity, a core component of a deck becoming your signature list involves other people's perceptions. As an example, Graham Stark's Bear Force 1 deck. It started as a gag on Load and Grody Run's Friday nights, but it later became the winning deck on one of the most popular episodes of Commander gameplay ever. A true meme to dream pipeline. Now, I don't think Graham ever would say something like this, but if he were to try and say that Bear Force 1 is not his signature deck, I wouldn't agree. Again, I don't think he'd ever actually say that. I'm not putting any words in his mouth. He's very aware of the Bear Force 1 branding. It's just an example that he undeniably made that deck famous, and that our collective perception plays a role in what he's particularly known for. You know, it would be like if George Lucas tried to say that Star Wars was actually about Barbie dolls, or if the Game of Thrones writers tried to say that the last season was good. Like, no, an author is not the sole arbiter once they put their work out there. An audience is a participant in the creation of artistic meaning or interpretation or association. Graham's bear deck came from him, but the audience is involved in helping Graham assume that mantle. Now that's true of a signature deck, but a favorite deck obviously doesn't have that component. A favorite deck need only be personal. So if Graham were to say that his favorite deck is actually his Sapling of Kolfornor deck, I'd believe him. Now, a lot of my examples have been other creators, obviously, but the reason this interests me is because this doesn't just apply to Magic creators, it does apply to everyone. Being online and having a platform magnifies when a person is known for a certain deck, but even just within our own local playgroups, we can all still get certain reputations. A reputation of being known for powerful decks, or control decks, or being known for janky theme playstyles. And sometimes that reputation doesn't actually match with your personal favorite things, with the stuff that brings you the most enjoyment. And yet, once you're known for that something, it can be hard to change that impression and become seen the way that you want to be seen. And like it or not, this can also manifest in actual gameplay. If you're known for one particularly spiky deck, you may end up with a lot more attention on you even when you're playing a different silly theme deck, or when you're piloting a precon. Or if you're known for very silly decks, it's possible that people may not take your deductions about threat assessment quite as seriously during a game, even in the moments when you're trying to hang up the silliness and play a little bit more straightforwardly. I don't even think that's a conscious thing that people do. In my experience, it certainly never seemed to be done with malicious intent. I'm just trying to state that it is possible that our perceptions of a person's signature style could color our impressions of their game actions, even when they're in completely different scenarios, which may cause us to not weigh those things as objectively in the moment as we probably should. So, if those are some of the differences between signature and favorite deck, and if a signature deck can affect your reputation and shroud some of the things that are your favorites, and that's why a reputation can matter, then we have to ask, what are the qualities that can cause a deck to become your signature list? And are any of those qualities at odds with the qualities that would make something your favorite list? I'd argue that yes, some of them can absolutely be at odds, and I think it speaks to one of the weirdest things about the EDH community. In terms of components that can cause something to become perceived as your signature deck, I personally boil it down to three main factors. Number one, longevity. For instance, Sam from Rhystic Studies with the Mimeoplasm, Dana with Reki, Voxy with Prosh. They've had these decks for a good chunk of time. How long you've been playing a deck is a very simple factor here. We're more likely to associate a thing with you if you've had that thing around for a while. Also, the longer you've had it, the more likely you are to have maybe blinged it out a little bit with foils or with altars, which can also contribute to people's impression of that deck's notoriety. Number two, power. Brian Kibler's Dragon deck is totally nuts. Amy the Amazonian's Ragavan deck is a concept very well executed. Joe Johnson's Samut deck doesn't hold back. A signature deck has to be one that has made an impression on other people, and an easy way to make a big impression is for the deck to be impactful. And number three, uniqueness. Power Dragon's Rith deck is the 37th most popular Naya commander, not a very common legend to see across the table from you, and a rarer commander is one of the easiest ways to make something stand out. But also, sometimes uniqueness comes in the form of a more conceptual twist. Tomer's Oops All Changelings deck, Andy's Nezahal Voltron, Alex's Satoru deck, but it's all demons. Those stand out as unexpected and more iconic to their creators because they do a neat twist on our usual expectations. Now, something kind of odd here is that occasionally these categories, longevity, power, and uniqueness, can clash, contradict, or supersede each other. To again cite Olivia as an example, I don't think it's any coincidence that Breya became her signature list. Breya is a powerhouse. And in fact, I'd actually go as far as to say that her Omenkeel deck would have been incredibly hard to ever call her signature. The Omenkeel is unique, but Breya is so powerful and makes such a big impression that it might overshadow uniqueness in our minds when we think of the deck she's known for. Or, as another example, enough longevity can sometimes start to feel like it erodes a little bit at a deck's uniqueness. Zed from One More Mana has a Geralf deck that turns walls into flying zombies, and it's led by the 38th most popular mono-blue commander, so, not very popular. It's a super unique concept. It was great to play games against him when he was developing it, and even cooler to see him play it in some very big gameplay episodes. And over time, we've seen that walls version of Geralf has become the primary way that commander gets built now. This is something we've tried to explore a little bit in other videos on this channel too. At what point does something feel like your Geralf deck versus feeling like the Geralf deck? And that's a way that longevity can impact uniqueness. I imagine for CEDH players, where specific versions of a list can become especially famous for how they optimize certain battle plans or certain combo sequences, that clash of something being unique and then getting more renown and thus no longer feeling unique can be especially tricky to navigate. Now, real quick, it's worth throwing an asterisk onto my three main factors here, because there's also a bonus component about the 99 versus the commander. Sometimes we know a person's deck concept, and the commander is irrelevant. It might only be there to facilitate the deck's colors. The deck leader may indeed change down the road. As an example, Megan, the creator of Infinitokens, has an Island of Misfit Tokens deck, and the point of it is to play a ton of cards that make weird tokens. She uses Jared Carthalion as the leader of that deck right now, but she could totally switch the commander if she wanted, and the spirit of that deck would still be very much intact. Whereas sometimes we know a person's commander, and the 99 is the thing that's a lot more malleable. If Voxy changes her Prosh deck a little bit, then yeah, of course, we upgrade decks all the time. But if she changes the commander of that deck, that's a whole different deal. But even though occasionally those big three factors can sometimes clash against each other, I still think a deck's longevity, power, and uniqueness play the biggest role in something becoming a signature deck, and also in helping to craft that deck's reputation. Knowing these factors, I return to that question about whether any of those components are at odds with what makes a deck your favorite list. I argued yes, they can be at odds, and here's why. Longevity. The longer you've had that deck, the more the novelty of it could wear off, the less that you might instinctively reach for it on game nights because you've experienced what it has to offer. Power. Often, though not always, a more powerful deck is more streamlined, which means you probably know exactly what to already expect from the game experience. And also potentially, if a deck is more powerful, you may have experienced more victories with it. And when you have already experienced quite a lot of victories with that deck, potentially that can impact whether or not you feel tension with whether that deck will be able to do what it is that you want it to do. And uniqueness. A unique deck can have such difficult deck building restraints that sometimes there's a little bit less room to tinker with that list. And sometimes not being able to make as many edits or to try out a bunch of new things can lower your interest in that deck over time. Not only that, the more you're known for a certain deck, the more our brains start to crave for us to play against that typecast, because you don't want to be pigeonholed, I guess. For instance, from what I understand, a music artist's most popular song is rarely the song that they most enjoy performing. And you may have already noticed, but the through line of those three factors and the way that they clash against what could potentially make something your favorite deck is the ways that they potentially can reduce variety or variance. For instance, when a deck is powerful and it's streamlined, for instance, if it contains a lot of tutors, that reduces the variety that could exist in a game, and that can potentially take away a little bit of the tension that you might feel with that game, a little bit of the unexpectedness, the delight in discovering something new during a game. Or if a deck is super unique, potentially that means that it's only able to be built in one specific way, and not being able to tinker further with that deck reduces your ability to have variety with the 99, etc. All three of those factors can also play a role in how a deck becomes your favorite. If it's doing something powerful, that's exciting. If it's doing something unique, that's a cool way to express yourself. If you've had it for a long time, it's a source of comfort. But if it doesn't have any variety for you to experience during gameplay, that means that you're losing a little bit of the novelty, and novelty is a really big ingredient in whether something is our favorite. And of course, the way that those decks affect our reputation also plays a role in that. That's the really important part, right? The actual core of this is how we become known for certain things, how to recognize what it is that we're known for, and to come to terms with the effect that that reputation has on our friend groups, that it has on the games that we play. And also how it even affects our own self-perception. I've billed myself as a Golgari guy for a really long time. I've joked in the past about having more Golgari decks than I can count. But for a year or two there, I actually had more Dimir and Orzhov decks than I had Golgari decks. I just didn't notice it because all of my decks were doing graveyard things, and graveyard things is just mentally associated with Golgari. But yeah, that's something I didn't actually catch about myself for a while there. And I'm not gonna lie, there's a little bit of a weird identity thing that happens there, right? If I'm known for Golgari, do I then feel hypocritical if I'm not living up to that? Like, do I need to go build more Golgari decks to maintain that title, if you can call it that? Even if at that point I'm not particularly interested in any other Golgari offerings and I'm interested in trying something else right now, Or to put this a potentially more relatable way, if you are known for a particularly powerful signature deck and that deck has that reputation of being really good, does everyone then start to treat you like you're playing powerful stuff anyway, no matter what it is that you're playing? And if so, does it start to feel like a lost cause to try ever building something more casual? Do you eventually just lean into that image and only build powerful stuff in the future and abandon any attempt to try something that's a little bit more low-key because of that reputation? And if you do lean into that, in the future, how do you ever undo that image? To reiterate, changing an impression is hard. I've known a buddy of mine as a hardcore blue spellslinger player for at least a decade. But the decks he's built most recently have been like the infamous Cruel Claw, Wilson with Noble Heritage. The deck he plays the most often is Queen Marchesa. Clearly, I have some recalibrating to do. I have a decade of experience of him playing a bunch of tricksy counterspells and doing odd control stuff. But obviously, he's having a lot of success exploring some different archetypes here. That's how difficult it can be to change an impression. Decks and playstyles will earn you a reputation that lasts for years, and it's not easy to shift that perception. So if you yourself are experiencing a little bit of this PR issue with your own playgroup, where, you're known for something that isn't actually your most favorite after all, it isn't actually the thing that you're trying to play the most these days, I do think you're going to have to give a little bit of grace about that. Chances are that's also true of someone else in your group too. We all have that going on, and it's hard for all of us to unlearn. It won't change very quickly, and it certainly doesn't help to try and force it either. I hinted at a particularly odd thing about EDH players earlier, and going over all of this, I think that odd thing is in fact the thing that enabled the EDH format to take off in the way that it did. I think we're very attached to the idea of a signature style, and I think in particular we're attached to the idea of uniqueness. Of the three possible factors, I think that uniqueness has got to be the most powerful one. We are collectively very attached to the idea of Blue Eyes White Dragon being the Kaiba card, and Commander, as a format, gave us the ability to all become Kaibas and Yugis. The self-expression that EDH gives us, the ease of finding a signature style and becoming known for something in particular, is undoubtedly one of the big things that helped the format catch fire and become Magic's most popular phenomenon. But we've got to watch out for the weird parts of that too. It does manifest in some odd ways sometimes, such as the way that we all try really hard to avoid repeat commanders in a pod. That's pretty normal, but it is kind of an interesting factor to observe, right? Or the way that we sometimes feel like, maybe I shouldn't build that deck because someone else I know already built that commander first. Also kind of interesting. Or the way that sometimes we as players will tinker and tinker and tinker and tinker with a list to make it a perfect signature work of art that sometimes we enjoyed brewing more than we enjoyed playing. A lot of those behaviors are pretty normalized, but even if they are normal, they're still worth a little bit of scrutiny because they can help us identify where our collective values are pointed. And I think it also reveals a collective habit of how much we really enjoy the ability to simply be able to put things into some pretty easy boxes, some pretty easy categories. To take the cardboard example here, we like being able to look at a card and say, well, that's ramp, that's card draw, that's removal. But some cards are many things at once. They're not easily sortable into any single category. And that is especially true of people when it comes to their signature styles. We also probably shouldn't put those into easy boxes either. If I could go back to when I was first asking people about their signature decks, I'd love to amend my question to also ask about their favorite deck, if it is a different deck than what they think is their signature list. It wasn't different for me. My signature deck is my favorite deck, but it's possible that only asking about just a signature deck, it's possible that that's a reductive way to approach things. If we only ever perceive someone as a Prosh player, a power player, the Spellslinger guy, just a Timmy, we might miss out on the other parts of themselves that they want to express. I'd like to invite you to try out this exercise. If you've got a regular or even semi-regular group of folks that you play with, ask them what they think is your signature deck and what they think is your favorite deck, and see if it lines up with what you would say about yourself too. I think that can be a small but potentially helpful way to become more aware of how other people perceive you, and also help you tune other folks into the things that you are currently enjoying the most. In fact, let me just ask it right now. What is your signature deck, and is it different than your favorite deck? And if so, why do you think that is? Let me know in the comments below. Remember again to do the YouTube thing. And thanks for spending some time with me just ruminating about the stuff that we play and what it says about us and our ability to express ourselves to other people. And until next time, remember, EDH wreck your deck before you wreck your deck.